Okay, so what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be um, going through this as if I was going through with an adoptive family, so that you guys have that recorded so you can view it. You can know how we would do it with a family. Um, I was just telling Angela, who's here with me, who I'm doing this with, I'm going to go through it one section at a time because I can only make the videos so large in order to upload them, so that you can view them. So I'll be going through it. If you look in your book, it's separated into chapters and sections. I'll go through it one section at a time. So in the end, you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 7 videos. Okay. So let's get started. Okay. So when you meet with a family, what you'll do is you will take your book that you have. You'll also take a book for them to have. They get to keep that book, and of course, you're not going to read through every chapter with them. When you meet with them, you're just kind of going to summarize the chapters and talk a little bit about some of the specific subjects. But the reason that we give it to them is so that they can then go back and review it when they need to. Some of the further chapters talk about some of the issues that are post-adoption, but in the future. Like there's one chapter in here that goes through different life stages and how adoption affects children at different life stages. So we give this to them so that they have to look back at later. So the first section is a general section called adoption-related articles. So it's very broad in that it deals with some different adoption-related issues. So the first article is called A Healthy Adoptive Family, What Is It? And this article talks about what, like the title said, what the definition is of a healthy adoptive family, what makes a healthy adoptive family. Of course, an adoptive family is different than a biological family, and you're going to deal with things, being an adoptive parent, that a biological parent doesn't have to go through. And if you're already a biological parent, then you're going to be going through things with your adoption that you didn't have to go through with your biological child. So in this article, it lists, I believe there's 7 different factors, 8 different factors that make up a healthy adoptive family. So the first factor there on page 2 is an understanding that building a family through adoption presents unique challenges. Like I said, this isn't like biological parenting. There are going to be unique things that come up within adoptive parenting that are completely different from biological parenting. You can read all the parenting books you want, and they'll give you lots of information, but if you're an adoptive parent, there's going to be things that you just learn as you go and have to be flexible with. The second factor is that a healthy adoptive family has complete agreement between the two parents about the adoption. We see a lot within the adoption community that there's usually one parent that is more pushing it than the other parent. A lot of times that's the wife, just because the wife's usually the first one to get the spark to want to adopt. But I've seen it be the husband as well. But it's really important that when the couple starts the process that they're both on board, and that they're both on the same terms as far as being in support of the adoption and being okay with moving forward with the adoption at that time. If there's been infertility issues, it's important to make sure that both couple have kind of grieved through the infertility process and that loss of being able to have a child biologically. Factor 3 is that a healthy adoptive family is committed to the permanency of the family even in the roughest waters. This is especially important as we see more adoption dissolutions taking place. When things get difficult in an adoptive placement, it's important to have that commitment to the child and to know no matter what, this is my child and we're going to go through difficult things, but we're going to work through it as a family. Adoptive parenting is different than biological parenting in that you have to work harder for the attachment and for the bond. We talk a lot of times with our families about how love is a choice. And you see that a lot in adoptive parenting because there's not always the initial feelings of love like you have with a biological child that you carry for 9 months. So knowing that love is a choice, it's not a feeling that you're going to feel, but choices that you make every day to love this child and to be committed to this child no matter what. Factor 4 is the ability to acknowledge conflicting emotions. And this happens with any parenting, biological or adopted. But sometimes in adopted, it's more difficult because, like I said, you don't have that initial bond and attachment. You have to work harder for it than you do typically with biological children. So you're going to have days where you are more patient towards your children than others, and that goes for biological and adopted. So there's going to be conflicting emotions. The fifth factor is that healthy adoptive families have the ability to defer parental fulfillment and refuse to be rejected by the child. A lot of families struggle with this feeling of entitlement to the child and feeling like the child is really theirs, especially if a child is rejecting. I know I have some friends that adopted, and they, when they initially brought the child home, the child wanted nothing to do with the mother. And she would hit the mother and kick the mother and, pull her hair and spit at her because she was rejecting that mother because she had been raised by women in the orphanage. And so she felt like this mother was trying to replace the mother she knew in the orphanage setting. So there was that rejection. And so knowing that may come, but being committed to it no matter what. Factor 6 is an openness to seeking professional help or support. This is important because almost every adoptive family at some point needs some kind of professional assistance, whether it's the child has medical special needs, and so they're needing a doctor. It might be counseling or therapy or psychologists. I'm a firm believer that every adopted child should be in counseling at one point in their lives, whether it's when they're young and they first come home and they're struggling with adjustment, or maybe when they're a teenager and they're struggling with learning who they are, or maybe even later as adults. There's just a lot of things that they've had to deal with in their lives that other children haven't had to. Factor 7 is that a healthy adoptive family has commitment to explore the cultural heritage and racial needs of their youngster and move to incorporate those issues into their family life. And we'll talk more about this because there's a section in here particularly on interracial adoption. Factor 8 is that healthy adoptive families have an understanding that adoption's core issues affect each family member throughout life. And I like that it says here each family member, because a lot of times you think of the adopted child and you think of the parents and how it affects all of them. But we a lot of times also see siblings struggling with it. If there's biological children, if there's children that have been adopted previously, they struggle with things throughout their life too. So it's important to know that the adoption is a big part of who this child is. And so it's not going to be something you deal with for the first 6 months after they're adopted and then everything's dandy and rosy and you move on. There's going to be things that come up throughout the child's life. Okay, the next article in here is called Adoptive Parents Equal Real Parents, Teaching This Equation at School and at Home. I spoke a little bit in the last article on that entitlement feeling and feeling that entitlement to your child, especially if they're rejecting you. But you hear this phrase, real parent, a lot in our culture and society within adoption with people that don't know the correct lingo or the politically correct way to talk about adoption. So someone will come up to an adoptive parent and ask about their child's real parents. And that always irks adoptive families because, you're saying, well, I clean up the puke and I change the diapers and I do all this. I'm pretty sure I'm the real parent. So that's just a very sensitive word for adoptive families. So this article talks about some ways to teach that. The first is to work on the problem of language. A lot of families and people just are ignorant about what the correct terminology is to use with adoption. And so being an adoptive parent, it gives you the opportunity to teach people and to inform people. I've worked in this field for 10 years, and I still correct my mom when she uses incorrect terminology. Well, somebody will say, well, the birth mother gives the child up for adoption. I'm like, no, that's not the correct terminology. We say she makes an adoption plan, because that's more positive. And we'll talk about that here in the next article. Keeping the birth parent's role in the past is important. The birth parent is such an important aspect of who that child is, but you also want to make sure that in order to help you feel entitled to this child, you know that's part of their past. It's part of who they are, but it's not a present everyday issue that you have to deal with. The third thing is speak positively about adoption as one good way that children come to parents. Every adoption is born from loss, and every adoption is born from abandonment issues. And that's something the child is going to have to deal with as they grow older. But it's important to know that for your child to know that there are many ways that children come into families, whether it's by adoption or whether it's biologically or whether it's through foster care or surrogacy. But this is one of the good ways that children come to parents. The next article kind of follows up to what we're talking about in there, speaking positively about adoption. It uses the term respectful adoption language, RAL. And like I said, a lot of people just don't know the correct terminology. So a lot of people, they're not trying to be rude or they're not trying to hurt an adoptive parent's feelings. They just don't know what the correct terminology is. When I first entered this field, I was using a lot of the negative terms just because I knew no better. And it took me time to learn what the real and correct terminology is. So if you go to the very last page of this article, actually it's like the page after it, there's a graph on there that says positive adoption language. And so it lists what the positive language is right next to what the negative language is. And if you look down the negative language, a lot of these terms are the terms that people use in society that don't have experience with adoption. But again, it's just because of ignorance. And so we as adoptive families have the opportunity to educate people on the correct terminology to use. I know some adoptive parents have even made a copy of this and given it to close people, like grandparents or somebody like that. Just because that's an easy, non-confrontational way to correct the language. Just saying, hey, we're learning about this. We thought we would give it to the people that we love that are going to be close to our child too. The next article is on post-adoption depression syndrome. While this is not something that is in the DSM, it's not something that's an actual diagnosable mental health illness, it is an issue that some adoptive families struggle with. And the easiest way to help you understand what it is that it's almost like a post-Christmas letdown. You've had all this time getting ready for the adoption, you've put in so much work into it, you've fundraised, you've done all these things to get ready for your child, and then they're there, and things might not be rosy, things might not be going well, or if it's a newborn baby, they just sit there and poop and eat and don't do a whole lot and sleep. So a lot of families can just kind of feel that letdown after they come home. So just being aware of what your feelings are and your emotions and how you're feeling, and talk about it. This is an area where having other adoptive families within your life can be a real strength. I know after I came home from Taiwan with my son, those first couple of weeks were rough, where he was super clean, he wouldn't let go of my legs, and it was just really, really hard. And so I reached out to some other adoptive moms, and they said, oh yeah, I know what you're going through, I went through the same thing, it's okay, it'll get better, give it a couple weeks. And of course it did, but just having other adoptive families that can say, we've been there, we know it's difficult, was extremely great for me. This next article is gracious answers to awkward questions about our adopted kids. Being an adoptive parent, you almost become a billboard for adoption, especially if your child looks different from you, and there's an obvious difference. Some people will immediately assume that it's an adoption. A lot of times since I work in adoption, if I see a family where the children are different race than the parents, I automatically think that because that's my world and it's what I grew up in, but I know it's not always people's first inclination. But people are going to ask you about your adoption. And sometimes it's not always the greatest questions, and sometimes they're not always said in the most politically correct terminology. We've had families who people ask them about the cost of their adoption and how much did this child cost, and well, what about the child's real parents, and just questions that can pick at you as the parent and not and irritate you. I had one friend who she would always, whenever somebody would ask her a question in public, she would always immediately follow it up with, why do you ask that? Just so that she can get a sense of why they're asking what they're asking. Are they just being nosy? And a lot of times that question will kind of shut them down if they're just being nosy. Or maybe they're interested in adoption, or they have a family member interested in adoption. So they might have a general desire to know for a good reason, just might not know how to word that. I also knew of somebody that had just this little card made up, and whenever somebody would ask them about an adoption, they would say, I'm busy right now, or I'm with my children right now, but here's my card, you can call me sometime and we can talk about it if you'd like, or you can email me. One of the important things that this article talks about is just to keep in mind that when these questions are asked of you, your children are almost always within earshot of it. So, one, you want to be careful how you respond physically. If you get defensive, if you're gracious, if a kid sees their mom get defensive and get upset when asked about their adoption, they're gonna take that personally and say, okay, mom doesn't want to talk about my adoption. It's a sensitive subject, something she doesn't want to talk about. It's also important to keep in mind that your child's story is their story, and they might not want it being shared with everybody. It's their personal information. So just be very careful about how you respond and what you respond with when your children are in earshot. That's another reason why that woman made up the card, because she didn't want to talk about it in front of her children. But in a more private setting, it would be more appropriate. The next article is nature versus nurture. And this is a topic that you get a lot of discussion on within the adoption community, especially as adopted children grow older. It's amazing to me, we brought home my son at 9 months old, and it's amazing to me how there will be things that he does that my husband and I will be like, that's got to be his birth parents, because that's not us at all. And then there's things that he does that are like spot on my husband's personality, like tit for tat, like same thing. So it's always interesting to see that blend of things that are clearly coming from us and things that are clearly coming from his biological parents. A lot of families, if a child is struggling, or if a child is having maybe some developmental struggles, the first question they always ask is, okay, is this adoption related, or is this just natural child development related, or is this health issue related? And that's always difficult to discern. So we always tell families, if it's a medical issue, first talk to a doctor. That should be your primary step, is to talk to a doctor, see what they think, get a professional's opinion on it. And then if it's nothing physical, if it's nothing medical, then kind of move on to the adoption phase of, okay, is this something adoption related that's affecting them? Let's see. It's also important to keep in mind with this that everything that occurs in your child's life, even though their adoption isn't the one defining thing about them, you kind of need to view everything that goes on in their life through an adoption lens, and keep that in mind when working with your kids. Okay, I'm going to stop this and move on to the next